Jackson State and Tennessee State will renew their rivalry tomorrow night in Nashville at the John Merritt Classic. And JSU head coach T.C. Taylor says his team is locked in as the Tigers get set to open the season. Taylor says Tennessee State is still finding its identity under a new-look roster with a transfer quarterback and a handful of returning pass rushers. But for JSU, the bigger story's on their own sideline with a rebuilt secondary featuring returning preseason Defensive Player of the Year Cam Salas, plus transfer additions Swipe Marshall and Jalen Foster. And up front, Quavion Davis anchors an offensive line that added Melvin Collins Jr. from Western Kentucky. Here's how Coach Taylor breaks down tomorrow's matchup.
They kind of like, every year with college football, the landscape and everything, everybody's trying to just build a new team. They got a lot of new faces in there. They got a couple guys from last year's team that's, defensive end that can rush the passer a little bit. I think a corner can play pretty well, transfer quarterback in there. So they're kind of like every other college football team trying to figure it out.
Kickoff for JSU and Tennessee State set for 7:30 tomorrow night.